Welcome to another edition of the Oath and the Office podcast. I am John Fugelsang. It is so good to have you with us. This podcast is, of course, based on the essential book, The Oath and the Office, a guide to the Constitution for future presidents, which is authored by the star of our show, Professor Corey Brettschneider, the man with a PhD in politics from Princeton, the law degree from Stanford, and he fights to enrich the minds of students in the poli-sci department at Brown. Many of you have read Professor Brettschneider on CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times. Check out his most recent book, The Presidents and the People, The Five Leaders Who Threatened Democracy and the Citizens Who Fought to Defend It. Every week we gather together here and I get my free constitutional law class. Professor Brettschneider, it's good to see you.
Thanks so much, John. I'm looking forward to this one. Of course, we have an amazing guest, Mike Sachs, who interviewed me. I think it was one of the first interviews I did when The Oath and the Office first came out in 2018, and he interviewed me of all places at Fox 5. So he'll talk about the transition from being a premier legal TV journalist to running for Congress. He's challenging Mike Lawler in New York. Mike Lawler, who just announced, by the way, that he's not running for governor. He's going to seek re-election. And Mike is seeking, I should say, the Democratic nomination. But he's not your average candidate. I mean, this is somebody who knows the topics that we cover inside and out. He really was, for a very long time, a premier legal journalist. He has a law degree as well. And so that mix really interests me. And we're always talking about hope and the need to stand up. We'll continue to do that despite the horrible news of the attempt to prosecute political opponents by Trump and his administration. But we're also going to profile the people fighting back, and Mike is certainly one of them.
I can't wait. He's a very interesting guy and a very compelling race. We have a lot to cover today, Professor. I want to talk about immigration and free speech, and do non-citizens actually have rights? Because we have to keep reminding people about how the Constitution works, as well as weaponizing civil rights law. They're still overreaching with Harvard. But I want to start with something you just mentioned. Donald Trump and Tulsi Gabbard have cooked up the latest episode of their reality show, Let's All Pretend Obama Did a Russia Hoax So We Don't Have to Talk About Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Corey, I don't want to talk about Epstein more than I have to, but I think just as last year, this time, Joe Biden's age seemed to touch every single piece of our discourse. I think Jeffrey Epstein's ghost is going to be doing that for quite a while now. Tulsi Gabbard, former Democrat, voted for Obama. Now she's a foreign asset with the world's most stupid security clearances, is claiming that Obama cooked up a fake Russia interference story, which is funny because, as you might remember, Professor, the Mueller report and the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee all confirmed that Russia did interfere in 2016 to help Trump win. Sentient listeners might recall Trump going on live TV and literally saying, Russia, if you're listening. And wouldn't you know it, they were, and they hacked Hillary that night. Corey, even Marco Rubio signed off on the 2020 bipartisan Senate Intel report saying Putin personally ordered the interference to help Trump. And now Tulsi Gabbard is acting like she cracked the case, like she's a gay-bashing fascist Nancy Drew who tries to frame the Hardy Boys. So, Professor, where do we begin? I can remember when Republicans bragged about being the party of Lincoln, not the party of Epstein Protection Services, but going after Barack Obama. Trump posted a fake AI-generated video of Obama being arrested. What are the legal and moral stakes when a president and a member of his cabinet promote coordinated lies as justice?
Well, let me start with the moral stakes, because I think as much as we have to talk about the dangerous threat to the rule of law itself, and there are protections against this succeeding, but there is a threat of this becoming real, as absurd as it is. But before we get to that, I think we've got to talk about the moral stakes, and I love that you asked about that, because the moral stakes aren't just that, of course, it's immoral to seek to prosecute your political opponents, but that it really is about the death of truth that we've had. And I just want to reiterate and expand on what you said about the investigation. Although Mr. Mueller, in his report, Robert Mueller, found in part one no evidence that Trump instigated the Russian interference with the election, there was no question that there was Russian interference on social media and other ways. The Russians, Vladimir Putin, wanted Trump to win. There was a Department of Justice investigation. In fact, an indictment. These people were never brought to trial because, of course, they're in Russia itself, but of the agents that were carrying this propaganda and interference campaign out. There were members of Congress, including Marco Rubio, as you just said, who acknowledged that this happened. That is true. There was a Russian attempt to interfere with the election in 2016, no question about it. Now, as Tulsi Gabbard, who is in charge of the Director of National Intelligence, begins to lie, to rewrite the story, the danger is that the lie becomes the reality. I'm reminded of an amazing Václav Havel essay about how the Soviet system succeeded in its totalitarianism. And part of it, he says, is there was a denial of the ability to live in truth. And instead, there was a papering of lies across the society, written in place after place. And that's what this is an attempt to do. So there is a moral challenge to truth itself. That is what's so frightening. The legal stakes are real because as much as I believe that an indictment wouldn't succeed, and certainly a trial, and there are judges, and as much as Trump controls the Supreme Court, they won't decide this. It'd go to a federal court, and there, I think, of course, he would be exonerated in any real scenario, except for the fact that it might get going because Trump controls the Department of Justice. Theoretically, the Department of Justice is independent. But Pam Bondi has showed she's anything but independent. She is a lackey of this president. So his whims could very easily become reality, even if they don't ultimately succeed. But that is a giant step in the direction of the coup. If Barack Obama were to be successfully prosecuted, and I fear that world, if it ever happened, we're no longer going to talk about an ongoing or possible coup. It's happened. The coup will have succeeded because that would be the destruction of anything left of the rule of law. I'll say one other thing, which is the language of coup, which is really in this podcast one of the main themes, that we are not facing a military coup, but a coup from the inside, a president who will shut down the other branches. That's the language that Trump is using. It's why he wants this prosecution, because he wants to be able to pin a so-called coup on someone else, namely Barack Obama.
Oh, yeah. And this will work very well on low-frequency white folks who've never heard the words Jeffrey or Epstein in the same sentence. But it's all a distraction, just like he's not really suing the Wall Street Journal. He's going to back down before the discovery phase. I'm not distracted from Epstein, but I find the story fascinating because this person, Tulsi Gabbard, our Director of National Intelligence, let that sink in, this woman who called Bashar al-Assad a peaceful reformer, the way she's lying about this, Professor, from our government, is claiming that Russia never interfered because, wait for it, they didn't hack voting machines. And I'm like, girl, nobody said they hacked voting machines. They stole emails. They ran social media disinformation campaigns all over Facebook. They fed lies directly into the MAGA bloodstream until half the country thought George Soros was hiding in the microwave. And now she's saying that Obama created a Russia hoax, which again contradicts both the Mueller report and the Republican-led Senate Intel Committee, unanimously confirmed this under Trump that Russia interfered. Can you walk us through any more of the actual legal record and how these new claims attempt to gaslight the American public? Because the facts seem pretty black and white, Professor.
Well, I mean, I think we just have to call it what it is. It's an attempt to take basic facts and then to put lying, I don't see any other way to put it, spin on it, that adds in this actor that really played no role in trying to defeat Trump. I mean, I think the best way to understand what they're doing, and this isn't too much charity, but I think it at least gives us an understanding, is that, that everything we say to them, they want to say back. So the fact that Russia did try to intervene in the election on behalf of Trump, they want to turn into the idea that somehow Obama was working with the foreign government in order to swing that election to his party. So I think it's that simple. And, what's so frightening is you want to think to yourself, okay, these agencies are independent to some degree of the President of the United States. And in the past, that's been true. The intelligence community has had an obligation to tell the truth, to not be spun. Now, we know that often doesn't happen, but there were periods of time in which, especially in the post-Nixon period, there was an investigation of the CIA and its wrongdoing and an attempt to come clean about what was happening, and at least an attempt at oversight by the Congress to make sure there was some independence. Now, did that ever succeed or not? We could debate that, but the 70s was that period, certainly in the Department of Justice. there was a huge effort within, and there are many articles and books written about this in the 1970s, to recover from the weaponization of the Department of Justice by creating independence. Now, what's happened is there is no legal independence. That's the problem, that these heads of these groups, the Department of Justice, Pam Bondi, the head of the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, serve at the pleasure of the president, and he's used that in order to weaponize those supposedly independent groups to make himself powerful and to go after opponents. On the distraction point, I do want to say something about that. Obama, of course, too, also said this is a distraction from Jeffrey Epstein, and of course that's right. There's a 5-alarm fire going on within the MAGA world as they learn. I think many of them didn't realize that Jeffrey Epstein was deeply involved with Trump, that they were friends, that there are photos of them. But as they're discovering it, they're pretty upset about it. Now, that's a frightening thing for the President of the United States, for Donald Trump. And what better way to distract than to go after one of the most respected political opponents, Barack Obama. But what's scary about it is that sometimes the distraction can become the reality. And you know, the fact that he controls these agencies is what makes him so dangerous. So Barack Obama is right to call it a distraction. We've been talking about it that way. I think that is the right way to talk about it. But it is a real threat, given the power of the presidency. And as much as Obama has started to speak out against it, I feel like, you know, this is it. This is time to do it. You can't be above the fray when it comes to a self-coup. And I think he's in real time seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's amusing watching Tulsi play Renfield to Orange Dracula, but in the midst of all this, it's not just Obama where we're seeing this abuse of power as a grand distraction. You were interviewed this week in the New Republic, Professor, and you were talking about the weaponization of inspectors general, in this case, to go after the junior senator from California, Adam Schiff. I have a lot of questions about this, about the Fannie Mae inspector general. But can you, before we get into the specifics, can you explain the original purpose and function of inspectors general within the federal government? How are they designed to operate as checks on executive power?
Well, I think we're just continuing on the same theme. And what's nice about a podcast as opposed to a brief interview is we have time to talk about the mechanics of how a president who is as ill-intentioned as this president is can weaponize the entire federal government. There are more than 2 million people in the federal government. It is enormous, not counting military. And there is a lot of potential within it to do things that are nefarious, despite the intent of congressional legislation that's meant to protect us against a dangerous president. So in the end of Nixon, I talked about how there were attempts to rein in the intelligence agencies, an attempt to rein in the Department of Justice to ensure its independence from a dangerous president. Well, one of the pieces of legislation in all of this that was the most important across the federal government was the Inspector General's Act that created the Inspector Generals in the late 1970s. And what that act did was it placed in each individual agency, and the numbers changed over time, it was so successful they grew, this office that was charged with nothing less than rooting out corruption, than seeing, for instance, in the IRS, if the president was, as Nixon did, trying to use the agency to create audits for political opponents. And the presidents and the people, I talk a little bit about this in the research for the book. I interviewed one of the living members of Nixon's enemies list who was targeted by the IRS. It's not just that this was a threat, it happened. Now, what this Inspector General's Act was meant to do is prevent that, to be a shield against presidential abuse. But what Trump has figured out in his team is that you could take that shield and use it as a sword. And that's what he's done here with this Inspector General. He's used this agency that's supposed to protect against abuse and used it as a way of attacking Senator Schiff to dig up information, claiming that he acted illegally and illicitly.
I mean, historically, have inspectors general been used to target political opponents, or is this current pattern unprecedented?
You know, I'm usually hesitant to say it's unprecedented because, of course, the presidents and the people is all about the idea that we have had presidents in the past before try to shut down the opposition. And so we had John Adams, for instance, in the Sedition Act, prosecute about 126 political opponents. But
That's
each
right.
iteration of the threat to democracy that we face, including this one, is different. And what's really unique about this, and I think is unprecedented to answer your question, is finding things that were meant to stop and curb presidential abuse, like the inspectors general, and using it to go after political opponents. That is unique and weird and frankly very scary, because as he did with the 1964 Civil Rights Act, he finds ways that are meant to protect civil rights, for instance, and uses it to weaponize it. The
Exactly.
Civil Rights Act is meant to protect against subordination of Black Americans, and yet he uses it to defend a idea of that really should be called white whites. That's an analogy with what he's doing with the Inspector General, meant to protect against presidential abuse and using it instead to shut down the opposition.
Yeah, I want to just ask one more specific question on this because we have a lot to get to and we have to hit a break. But how significant is the fact that a response to the Inspector General's document request was forwarded to William Pult, a Trump political appointee, rather than directly back to the office of Inspector General? I mean, that seems very problematic and yet another indication that this is heavily political. I'm sure Adam Schiff is lawyering up, but I don't think he's worried.
Well, I said to Greg Sargent, who did this great piece for the New Republic, that it's all in the nitty gritty in my interview with him, that it's all in the nitty gritty of how they weaponize these laws and institutions that are meant to protect us. And one of the easiest ways to do it is to destroy the line between political appointees who, are traditionally part of the president's agenda. And
That's right.
our system allows for a role of politics and for presidents to implement their agenda. But there also is meant to be a civil service that protects us against politicization of the kind that would lead to tyranny. That balance is essential. And now what are they doing? They're destroying those lines by having the civil servants essentially co-opted by the political appointees.
We have to hit a quick break, but when we come back, I want to ask you about non-citizens and what rights they actually have, because we need to be reminded about human rights. This is The Oath in the Office. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Oath in the Office podcast, starring Professor Corey Brettschneider. I am John Fugelsang, his evil sidekick. And, Corey, in the midst of all this Orwellian nonsense, the administration is openly saying that non-citizens don't have First Amendment rights, especially if they criticize the civilian government of Israel. Under this new doctrine, if you've got a green card and an opinion on something, the government can deport you for speech. Because I guess nothing says land of the free like treating the Bill of Rights as if it's a rental car agreement. We've already seen Khalil Muhammad jailed for speech. We've seen Rumieza Ozturk kidnapped off the sidewalk for free speech. They're out now, but the government's still insisting they can revoke visas over political beliefs. A federal judge has had to remind them that's not the case. And Corey, I was going to ask you if you've seen Superman yet, because there's literally a scene where he's told that he's an alien, and so the Constitution doesn't apply to him. I mean, with all this going on, let's just get the civics lesson out of the way. Do immigrants in the U.S., whether on a student visa or green card, have First Amendment protections?
I mean, incredibly, it is as bad as it sounds. Yes, they would deny Superman any free speech rights. I haven't seen it yet. It is on my list. I will see it in time for our next discussion.
I've seen it twice already. It's kind of sad. I've already seen it twice. But
I was a huge fan, of course, of the Christopher Reeve. I grew up with it, and so I'm really looking forward to this. And, what a symbol of what we're doing. I love that way that you're framing it. I don't love what's happening, but that superheroes come in all shapes and sizes, and not all of them are American citizens. And the idea that Superman's rights or any non-citizens' rights, and again, just to reiterate what you said, we're talking about people with green cards who are here, not undocumented people who are here legally, and in many cases are permanent residents with the right to work. And yet what they're saying is, no, we have two classes of people, some with free speech and some with others. There's a law called the INA. It was never used for this purpose, but this administration is. And it talks about the right, the power of the government to deport even green card holders for opposing the foreign policy of the United States. Now, that's a poorly drafted law. It's written in a very vague way, but it doesn't revoke the First Amendment. And the First Amendment is not vague. It couldn't be clearer. It doesn't talk about the rights of citizens. It talks about Congress shall not. That limits Congress's power to abridge free speech, and that includes everyone.
Whoa! You're saying it's limitations on government power, not on what people can do? Have our conservative friends heard about this, or do they like government now? You're exactly right, Professor, and it's like we have to keep reminding people of this. But I mean, the State Department continues to say that foreign nationals don't have free speech rights. Marco Rubio threw a man in a cage for a month over words, and lied about it too. So, what are the dangers of normalizing this stance, and how could this be even more deeply weaponized?
Well, this is not an abstract issue. We could just see it. We've talked a lot about the Khalil case in Colombia. This was the leader of a protest movement in Colombia who negotiated with Colombia, and he thought in good faith. And in exchange for doing that, was detained. Now, a judge where he's being held in Louisiana, and we heard Mike Zamor in a previous episode give us the play-by-play of where he was being held and what was happening in that litigation. They won. The ACLU and the groups they're partnering with prevailed. And that judge basically said, the government was pretending at one point that this had to do with a form he filled out incorrectly. He said, no, this is about free speech, and I'm not going to hold him here on those grounds. Now, that's just one case. That's the problem. We know about the Tufts student who was seized. There's a case pending now, too, in the appellate court, the federal appellate court, about two other individuals who were detained, who are being detained for their speech. Now, what's going to happen? I would like to say the obvious is true, which you and I have been pointed out, that as this judge did say in the Khalil case, that the First Amendment is not limited to citizens. It doesn't say that, and that's not in the text. And for a long time, conservatives and progressives and everyone in between agreed with that. And now that you have a authoritarian government, federal government in Trump, they are denying it explicitly. And, they have judges who unfortunately might agree with them. This one, I expect, will eventually go to the Supreme Court. And as much as I want to say we can trust the court to do the right thing, we know that that just has not been the case. And that's where we are with that. Now we'll keep fighting. The ACLU and other groups are doing it. There's networks now of smaller law firms after many of the big law firms have caved in that are doing these cases. And we need to have them happen around the country.
Well, let's talk about other people who are going through the same kind of pressures, some buckling, some not, because the DOJ is still trying to defund Harvard, not for embezzlement, not for hazing, not for snobbery, but because some students said anti-Israeli government things. You know what? And some students said anti-Semitic things, which is terrible speech, sure. Not criticizing Netanyahu, but anti-Semitic things, absolutely awful. But now the government thinks you can nuke an entire university's funding over it? I mean, this seems like fascism with a vendetta, and a federal judge is now weighing both sides of the Harvard versus Trump case. We now have the DOJ trying to pull all federal funding because of an alleged student statement. Professor, what is the legal precedent here? Can the federal government pull funding based on a student's speech?
Well, they have so many different theories, and they've switched what they're saying over and over. And as I track it, it's just clear that they're fishing. Harvard's motto, of course, is veritas, and this is the truth. This is the opposite of truth. That's the theme that we've been working with. They claimed at one point, right, that the institution was complicit in anti-Semitism, and as they've shown that they are taking anti-Semitism on campus very seriously, they've had a report revealing it and admitting that it existed in some pockets. They've taken action. So now the administration is shifting to saying, well, these are contracts that we can revoke for any reason. But what happened in this latest round is that the judge in the case really seems skeptical of the government's position, because what she's saying is, how are you claiming that these few instances of anti-Semitism, which Harvard is addressing, give the federal government the right to revoke grants in totally different areas, in the sciences, for instance,
right?
And in every area? So she seems rightly skeptical. And I'll add to that anti-Semitism is not the issue. What the administration is pushing in these negotiations with Harvard, with Princeton, and which unfortunately it looks like Columbia has caved into, and it's why I refuse to call them a university as long as they're collaborating with this fascist regime. What they really want is, and now this is going to sound benign, viewpoint diversity. But what does that mean? They want, in hiring specifically, not just in admissions, Trump supporters to be on the list. Now, if it turns out that in
fair
chemistry,
and balanced,
the best
Corey.
chemists
It's
are not
called
Trump
fair
supporters.
and balanced, sir. Fair
Sorry.
and balanced. Yeah.
Fair and balanced.
Exactly.
So, you have one, I just think this is ridiculous. You have a chemist who is the best in the world, and you have a chemist who is like 9,000th in the world, but the 9,000th chemist is a Trump supporter, and we're supposed to give that person equal weight? I mean, this is absurd. And yet that seems to be what they're saying under the guise of viewpoint neutrality. Christopher Rufo, who is really the point person in many ways on this, who's been pushing this idea of viewpoint diversity or neutrality, is really in many ways a poster child for this. This is somebody who in no universe could get an academic job. He actually pretended to have a degree from Harvard. It was actually from the extension school, and you could go through the details of his misleading statements about that. But, he'd love to have a job at Harvard, and he's a Trump supporter. So maybe, you should hire him in history or political science. And that's really how crude it is. And, rightly, the university is pushing back, and it looks like they're winning.
Yeah, this administration is filled with people who failed at academia or entertainment or decency and found a home. Professor, I could talk about this all day and what it means for academic freedom if governments can yank money over random campus protests. But I know we have a very special guest waiting in the wings. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we will be joined by Mike Sachs, former TV reporter, now one of the Democrats running for Representative Mike Lawler's seat in New York State. This is the Oath in the Office podcast. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Oath and the Office. I'm John Fugelsang. Professor Brettschneider, I'm very excited about our actual guest. He actually did appear on a TV show I hosted on a channel that we thought Al Gore was going to make it into a news channel, but instead was trying to have a property he could sell, Current TV. So it's been a while since I've seen Mike Sachs, but I've been very, very inspired by his campaign and by the reasons why he chose to run.
I'm also thrilled to welcome our guest, Mike Sachs. He was, for a long time, a legal reporter, wrote for the Huffington Post, was a TV reporter for Fox 5, and has made the decision to run for Congress. And of course, our theme throughout the entire podcast has been about hope in the face of adversity, and what more hopeful thing to do to really do what the framers imagined people of virtue to do, which is to take a stand, to run for office, and to challenge especially those in power who would threaten authoritarianism and support it. And that's certainly true of Representative Lawler, as to cut to the chase, as we'll talk about. I also have a personal connection to Mike, which I'll mention, which is that when The Oath in the Office, the book that this podcast is named after, came out, we were in touch, and he actually did a story for Fox 5 on The Oath in the Office. I was a little bit nervous given the theme of the book, like, what is this, like a gotcha sort of thing? But of course he did a great TV story, and it was a pleasure to work with him then, and I've followed his stuff, and I'm thrilled, Mike, that you're joining us, and especially that you're running for Congress. So welcome to The Oath in the Office.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you, John. I've been longtime fans of both you guys as well. So this is a dream come true to be in these boxes on the Zoom chat with you guys.
You're very kind, sir. I find your career fascinating. You've worked as a political and legal journalist for Fox 5 and for HuffPost. That's where I first met you. And I just want to ask the dumbest question to get started. When did you know it was time to stop asking the questions and start giving the answers? Was there a single moment or a final straw that made you say, screw it, I'm going to run for Congress?
January 6th was when I decided to stop having a front row seat to what was going on in the country and watching our democracy deteriorate by billionaire purchases of every lever of our government. And it was time for me to get in and actually take action. Now, I spent my entire career literally with a front row seat in Citizens United. I was the first in line to get and watch that case when it was reheard on September 9th, 2009, all the way through January 6th. And I thought it was my job, and it was my job, to tell my audience, whatever that audience was and wherever it was, what was going on, how things were happening. Not what to think, but to observe how all of our government was working, not necessarily for us. And my focus began on the Supreme Court. I'm a Supreme Court guy. Corey and I can talk about that a lot. Because I saw, when I was in law school at the end of the aughts, the Roberts Court emerging as the one branch of the federal government that was really the true policymaking and breaking body. And you saw then, over the course of 10, 15 years, now 15 years since I first started covering the court, that they've enabled this leopard eating face guy to come back into office. And we have a whole of government systemic breakdown that's stopping we the people from having nice things. That's what it comes down to. And we need people to be able to understand not just what we can do for the people, and there's a whole laundry list of things that we can do and should do to restore reproductive freedom and strengthen it, to restore voting rights and strengthen them, to deliver for workers that the Supreme Court has been shitting on for the past 15, 20 years, and to make sure that we have a majority rule in this country absent clear constitutional constraints. But right now, I hear a lot of what, but no how. And the reason I decided I wanted to run, to finish my answer to your question, which came a couple of years after I left journalism on January 6, 2021, was because
Wow.
I know how. Like, I saw quite literally how we got to this point, and I have an idea of how we can get us out, especially when the only branch of the federal government that we can hold, Democrats, both big D party and small d, people who believe in democracy, which is coextensive at this point,
Yes.
is one chamber of that branch, which is the House of Representatives. And we have a great opportunity to reorient our policymaking back to the people in the people's house.
Right on.
One of the things, Mike, that I love about the fact that you're running and your specific background is that I think that elections, although of course they have to be about pocketbook issues too, that this election and this congressional election has to be also about holding Donald Trump to account and educating the public, as you are in campaigning, about the coup, attempted coup that happened on January 6th, and about the, well, not just crisis of democracy, but John and I have been calling this a self-coup, not an invasion from the outside, but a destruction of the judiciary by the president and the destruction of Congress. And of course, what you're talking about is bringing back one of those branches to rescue our democracy. But how, I mean, the dilemma, and we did get into this with Attorney General Torres last week, is how to translate that for Americans, and in particular in this district that you're running in, which of course has resulted in the election of a MAGA Republican. So tell us about that as you go out, as you talk to voters. How do you bring this, not just the issues of inflation and unemployment and economic issues, but this crucial issue of our democracy to those voters? How do you convince them that it matters?
Well, here in New York's 17th district, which is comprised of northern Westchester, Rockland County, Putnam County, and a little sliver of Dutchess County, affordability is a big issue. But affordability and autocracy in this stage go together.
Yes.
We have a would-be autocrat and his enablers in this Republican Congress, including Congressman Mike Lawler, who are just handing their power of the people and our power of the purse over to Trump and the White House wholesale, so that they can enrich themselves and their billionaire best friends who put them in office at all of our expenses, quite literally stealing from the vulnerable. Healthcare, SNAP benefits, jobs, to make themselves richer and then to perpetuate their power, because this is something that is a truism I've come to find and I've come to see. When Republicans hold power, they hurt people, they tank the economy, and then they distort our democracy to preserve their power, because hurting people and tanking the economy is unpopular. So what we have seen and what we are going to see for the remainder of this Trump administration is a continuation of something that began, I'd say, during the Bush era, which is a reliance on pulling every anti-democratic lever of our Constitution to perpetuate power no matter the will of the people. Extreme partisan gerrymandering to distort state houses and the House and its makeup. We're seeing that now in Texas and Ohio. Floods of money in politics to distort the people's voice when it comes to picking who we want to run for office. The inherent malapportionment of the Senate, and then in which oftentimes the Republicans can have a majority of the Senate without a majority of the people's votes. And then when they do get a minority, they can rely on a minority of the minority with the filibuster to again block majority rule. Relying on the Electoral College to win office when they can't carry the popular vote. And say that the people are able to run the full gamut and get policies that the people want, popular policies, and we can get into what tends to be popular policies. They tend to be progressive policies.
That's true.
Say that those policies we were able to get the House, the Senate, the White House, and enact these laws that Republicans, Mitch McConnell, the best architect of it, they try to kill in the cradle because they know that they get repealed at the political peril of their opponents once they're actually made law or policy. Well, then you have a Supreme Court as the final boss, ready to declare Democrats unconstitutional and illegal, should they run the gauntlet.
Yeah.
And so these are the obstacles in the way to our having nice stuff, to our having restored and strengthened rights and liberties and freedoms that a majority of this country actually want. And what blows my mind is that for all of these years, when liberals and progressives were focusing on the court to save us because of some 15-year period where the court was actually doing good things for people, but in a slightly anti-democratic way because it was necessary to break the back of Southern apartheid.
Yes.
We had our hopes kept alive of a savior court because of a succession of ever more right-leaning swing justices with whom we were happy to crown a king so long as they preserved the stuff that we liked. Meanwhile, we were letting our own legislative power atrophy. We were letting our own power of the people atrophy due to congressional gridlock, due to being into the power of the pen and the phone of the presidents we liked, due to, again, hoping that King Kennedy would save us and deliver us from various evils that while he was still chomping away at our democracy with Citizens United in Shelby County and Rucho become, I can go on about this, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, we got to this point and we need to get ourselves out of it. And the only way to get ourselves out is to refocus the power in the people's house and use the House of Representatives as the people's PR firm, because come January 3rd, 2027, we won't be able to pass anything that we want to do. We won't be able to do so. Trump's in the White House and there will be a Senate that's probably majority. So how do we use that power that we have? Put forward a legislative agenda. And interrupt me when you want to, because I'm going now. I'm
Sure.
cooking.
No. I mean, let me ask, what is one bold legislative idea that you'd want to champion on your first day in Congress?
So you know how we had this one big, beautiful, ugly bill?
Yeah.
Why don't we have an omnibus bill of restoration of reproductive freedom, of voter rights, of workers' rights, of environmental protections, all in one package, a contract with America, but not stupid and evil. And you pass it quick,
right on,
fast. And you send it to the Senate, and the Senate kills it. And what do? We don't shut up. We don't just stop when the billionaire-backed system designed to block us does just that. We keep screaming until January 3rd, 2029, and all the way through January 6th, 2029. Because on day one when we walk in there, what are we going to do also? We're going to start saying, yo, JD, you going to open the envelopes? Hey, if you lose JD, if Trump third term loses JD, if another Republican loses JD, are you going to open the envelopes and certify the Electoral College on January 6th, 2029? Because we all know he's not going to do that. We all know that he's going to say that the Electoral Count Reform Act of 2022 was unconstitutional, and he's going to send it expedited to the Supreme Court. And what's this Supreme Court going to do? Corey, I ask you, what do you think this Supreme Court would do?
Let me just pick up on that because it's such an important point that I think we've mentioned before for listeners, but I want them to really follow it. One of the great things that did happen during the Biden administration is that Congress passed this Electoral Count Reform Act, which was meant to fix part of the problem of the Electoral College, which is that the coup of January 6th was based on this false idea that under the 12th Amendment, the Vice President of the United States had the power to certify or not certify votes. A false claim. The 12th Amendment really is just about the ability of the Vice President to serve a purely formal role. So the Electoral Count Reform Act was a good reform in that it fixed that. Now, Mike says, and this is exactly what we need from our candidates to understand this nitty-gritty, that the Vice President of the United States who's going to certify the next election is J.D. Vance. And the whole theory of the coup of January 6th was that the Constitution, regardless of what any law says, gives the Vice President that power. J.D. Vance, who went to Yale Law School, knows that.
And Vance was picked precisely because he denied the last election. Vance was picked to be vice president because he was a January 6th champion. He was a denier of the 2020 election. So in the House, We need people who can see around these corners, who can understand the anti-democratic moment we're in. We can understand that there are people now surrounding Trump who have zero confidence that his movement will survive because there is no one with the charisma to command his cult of personality when he's gone. And
Boom.
they're going to need to find some other way to retain power that isn't just relying on the Supreme Court.
John, if I could just get a quick follow-up to this, and I love that we are getting into the nitty-gritty, because what we're really talking about is how vulnerable the system is, and why, as
Yes.
much as there was a January 6th that didn't succeed, there could next time be a January 6th that does succeed in destroying democracy, that really is a
Bloodlessly.
successful
Yeah.
coup.
Legalistically.
Yes, and that they would use legal arguments, as John Eastman and Trump were doing. I mean, everything I just said is a coup, but it's a coup couched in the idea of the law.
And
that's
Corey,
the
I had
danger.
asked you, I had asked you, like, what would the Supreme Court do if Vance says, well, that law is unconstitutional and it expedites up to the Supreme Court? I mean,
Well,
I have
you
my
know,
ideas of what this court would do.
They
I'm
were
curious what you think.
certainly we know that there are a couple of votes. I think that Alito and Thomas would have been, and by the way, I think to go back to January 6th, a lot of the idea here, we know this because he's been said it in documents that were released by the House committee, that, he was a Thomas clerk, I believe, and
Yeah.
that he believed that ultimately that the vice president, the claim that the vice president had the ability to refuse to certify the votes, if Mike Pence would have gone along with this, of course, famously he did not,
Yeah.
they might have said, that's right, that's what the 12th Amendment says. And in the same way, if J.D. Vance tries it again, I think there are certainly 2 votes. I hope there aren't 5, but there might be. And that's why this is so dangerous. Mike, but on that point, I mean, on John's question, I love the idea of a bill that would, an omnibus bill that would really seek reform and reclaiming the power of Congress. And I think thinking big like that, I couldn't agree more. But what about a couple of other issues? I mean, do you favor impeachment, for instance, of this president in the next House, even if the Senate isn't controlled by Democrats, with the thought of getting these things on the agenda, announcing the wrongdoing? And relatedly, too, to go to the other branch, do you favor court reform? I know you've been such a critic for a long time and really calling out the politics of the court. And of course, court reform is a nice way of talking about the fact of either adding justices or the different theories of putting justices on lower courts and raising up others, but messing with the 9.
Yeah.
John's been calling them the dirty 6, which I love. but
We've messed with the 9. We've messed with the 9 before. Mitch McConnell gave us a court of 8 for a whole year just to deny the black president an up or down vote. It hasn't always been 9. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. So just thoughts on impeachment and on court reform.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that question because at least when it comes to our systemic issues, this is all part of the unfuck agenda. And with impeachment, we know so long as there aren't, 2/3 of the Senate in favor of conviction, then you're sending a message, right? But we've seen that message before. I think he's done nothing but impeachable offenses upon arriving back in office. Truly.
Yeah,
I do. I think whether the House would go, and I'm talking about a Democratic-controlled House, would go for impeachment. I think, like anything, impeachment is a matter of politics. It's political and legal together. And if we can break the back of this system and show that the dude's committed impeachable offenses without spinning our wheels and shutting down Congress to do so, then this is how we do it. Because this is all part of the overall agenda of using the House as the people's PR firm.
Yeah.
It is not only the contract with America that's not stupid and evil, the unfuck agenda, whatever we want to call it, the legislative package that gives people hope of what this country can be when we're all in it together and working for the people, but also aggressive oversight that focuses Monday through Friday, maybe in prime time, if that matters anymore, on the criminality and corruption of what will have been the first 2 years of the Trump administration and the criminality and corruption of what will have been the second 2 years of the Trump administration. Make a show of it. John, I'm sure you have ideas of how to make a show.
Well, I mean, I actually feel like I've said for a long time, Democrats should take a page out of the Republican playbook of having repeal Obamacare votes every single week. We mocked it back then when they had 70-odd repeal votes that were doomed to fail. But what they were doing was consolidating their base. They were fundraising like hell off of all these failed attempts. They kept showing to their base, we are fighting and willing to
Hmm.
get into the ring and get knocked down
Hmm.
again and again and again. So I
Hmm.
think he should, like, I love what we've seen Al Green do. I think a different Democrat should introduce a different article of impeachment every single week. Having said that, when they didn't vote to convict after seeing cops beaten by
Yeah.
terrorists for a
Yeah.
lie, I'm not all that optimistic as to what an actual impeachment would lead to with these particular Republicans. I'm more focused on a Truth and Reconciliation Committee at this
Hmm.
point. But
Yeah.
I'm wondering if I can ask you a little bit about journalism because you worked at Fox 5, now you're running as a Democrat, and we're witnessing this president lashing out at Voice of America, PBS, shaking down networks. And I'm curious, as a former Fox reporter, what's it like for you to see this man lashing out at the Wall Street Journal and attacking Fox for covering the Epstein letters story? As someone
Yeah.
from the media, do you feel that he's beginning to lose control of some of his more loyal megaphones?
Yes, and let me first make a caveat. Fox 5 New York that I was with, as along with Fox 5 DC and every other Fox
Oh yeah,
affiliate in the
yeah,
country, is Sports and Simpsons, not lies and
yes.
propaganda.
Oh, I totally know, but it's still under the Uncle Rupert umbrella. So I mean,
Yeah, but if you watch any of my reports from Fox, I was very focused on democracy and
oh,
truth and
everyone
honesty.
knows local Fox is
Yeah,
not the same as the Sean
yeah.
Hannity clown show. Absolutely.
And
including
when I was
your great piece on the oath in the office.
before I went before I went to Fox, I was with Scripps, which was a local news conglomerate that owns about 30 stations around the country. I was their DC national political correspondent, and I covered the 2016 campaigns and the early Trump administration. And in that capacity, I was the first journalist, I believe, during his presidency to hold a microphone up to his face and call him out on his lies.
Yeah.
During this time, they would call in the local DC correspondents for local news stations, thinking we'd be their Pravda to project out to the hinterlands. And they called us in for this junket they were doing with a bunch of conservative talk radio toadies for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. They're promoting its near passage. And at the time, remember, Trump kept saying, we're the most taxed country in the world, which wasn't true. And I'm in this room, and they're saying someone might come in soon. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Meaning Trump. Trump walks in. The press people bring us over to him, hoping that we'd ask him a bunch of softballs. And a couple of other reporters did. And then I just said, if you need the credibility to pass tax reform, why do you keep saying something that's so objectively false? I wasn't yet going to call him a liar because I don't even know if he knew he was lying at that point because he's just so addled. And he said, well, I meant the most taxed country in the developed world, which also was false. But
Right.
I wasn't going to I just wanted to hear his thoughts. So I say, why didn't you say that? Put my microphone in front of his face, and he just hems and haws until the press people say, okay, enough, everybody go away. Because, I was calling him a liar to his face. So I've been watching this happen from the first Trump administration, even while he was running for office during 2016. And, this stuff is all, we expect it now. It's all part of his MO. And it's done a lot of damage to our media, but it's also had a lot of people standing up, a lot of media standing up and standing forward and saying, we're not taking this anymore. We're going to call it as it is. And we're at this point now, I believe, where he has become so aggressive in his anti-constitutional actions that there's no other way to describe things but as such.
Yeah.
So that's my position on the media with it all. But I, for one, I couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. I had to get
Amen.
involved and be in some way an agent for change and rescue for our democracy. Because, like, listen, I have what I believe are good policy positions, which are largely consistent with what the Democrats are pushing forward. That'll be part of the legislative package. But it's in my interest, and it's in all of our interests in this country, to have a political pendulum that swings, a representative democracy that truly represents the people. Now, I believe that, like Social Security with the New Deal, like Medicare, Medicaid, Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, Fair Housing Act of the Great Society, and even Obamacare, I believe that when that people like good stuff and progressive stuff. And again, their electoral opponents repeal them at their political peril. That's why they capture the courts to do their dirty work. Justice Scalia said as
Yeah.
much during the Shelby County arguments.
Yeah.
And uh, and so we need to break that system. And it's not just about the what, but the how. And
Can I ask,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. And we're almost out of time, but there is a question I
Oh,
want to ask.
no.
One of the
I
things
should have mentioned also, Corey, while I was at Fox 5, I had a front row seat also to the Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell proceedings. I was there when both were indicted. I was in the courtroom when Jeffrey Epstein was walked in his shackles to be arraigned. I reported outside the Manhattan Federal Detention Center after he died. I was there in the courtroom when Epstein's victims gave their victim impact statements that they otherwise would have given when he was declared guilty had he not died. And I was in the courtroom from soup to nuts with Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, and I was outside reporting on her guilty verdict moments after it came down. So that, meanwhile, we have Lawler and the rest of these people who are running interference or deflection for Trump, who is being to prevent him from being hung by his own petard over the past bunch of years, playing up this conspiracy theory. So just this front row experience that I've had as a journalist for this moment, it plays exactly to this moment, and understanding how we then can push out these messages to the public, and so they will understand that we are working for them, and those guys are trying to stop you from having nice stuff.
Yes, definitely having somebody in Congress who had a firsthand seat to see the Epstein horrors and his relationship with Trump, I think it could only benefit those of us trying to stop this attempted coup, this president. I wanted to ask you though, Mike, to shift a little bit before we go. Our listeners, I know we're eager for this conversation because I'm hearing from them that they want to hear from those who are actually doing the work, who are actually fighting back, who are running for office or have office. We heard from the amazing Attorney General from New Mexico last week. We're hearing from somebody today who's trying to take back a seat from a MAGA Republican. And so much of your work, you mentioned Citizens United, was about campaign finance. Now you have to raise money and get into the nitty-gritty. I've had a lot of people, I'm surprised, don't know the details of what it takes to run, the role of money in politics. So talk to me about that, having covered it as a journalist and now having to participate in a system that is deeply, to say the least, problematic because of the role of money in politics. And how does that play, especially against somebody like Lawler, and just talk to us about the nitty-gritty of how you go about this and why money in politics matters so much as a topic for reform.
I spend a lot of time right behind us on my couch calling people for money. That's how I spend a lot of my day. And it's tragic and awful, but that's how the system is right now. And right now we have two parties there's no unilateral disarmament from the Democrats. We need a lot of money to fight against those who are getting money bombed with corporate cash. And I'm not taking any corporate cash, but I need to be constantly dialing for dollars and calling people instead of going out and meeting people, which I also do. There's not enough hours in the day. And we're against extreme partisan gerrymandering, which is also one of the reasons why we have this district, because there was North Carolina did its extreme gerrymander, then New York tried to do the same, but then New York's court said, no, you have to have fair maps. And so we ended up with a special master who put a thumb on the scale for the Republican, Mike Lawler, in this district. So a whole bunch of stuff happened. But there's only one party that's saying, well, sure, we'll use this stuff. It's a counteract that they're using it. Then when we get into power, we're going to get rid of it. We're going to get rid of it. Going to get rid of extreme partisan gerrymandering. We're going to try to do our best to get rid of money in politics so far, absent a constitutional amendment, should Citizens United require that. And we'll push for that too. But the way we get there is we need to, over the course of several elections, break all of these barriers, big money, distorted barriers that Republicans have put up over the years. So let me just drive this home, because this gets back to your court reform question, which I didn't address. And I know we're almost out of time. Right. But let me just tell you the rest of this idea. Right. We have the House for 2 years. We use that to keep an oversight, legislative vision for people to look forward to, and pointing our finger at J.D. Vance so people know, put them on notice, you're not going to pull that shit. Okay. On January 6, 2029. Right on the back of this vision, this inspiring vision, to let people know we're working for them, we win the White House. Maybe we win the Senate, but maybe we don't win the Senate. All right. We pass that legislative package again. Send it back over to the Senate, this time with the president saying, I'm willing to sign it. Again, point at the people saying they are stopping you from having nice stuff. Say we have, and say maybe 2029 or 2031, we have the Senate, but there's a filibuster. By then, we'll have gotten people to understand that the filibuster only protects Republicans from the consequences of their own bad policies. They don't want to pass abortion bans because they know they'll be thrown out of office immediately. They want to be able to tell their base, oh, the Democrats have stopped us from delivering from you. The filibuster serves them, it doesn't serve us, because when we get our good stuff passed, it doesn't get repealed. So we get the Senate to go along, and we get that to the president's desk. President signs it. And then every bit of legislation in this agenda that started on January 3rd, 2027, whether now this comes January 3rd, 2031 or what have you, okay, is designed as a fastball at this Supreme Court's head, daring them to make stuff up to strike things down that the people want, that are clearly constitutional. And if the Supreme Court, should it not change over by natural attrition at that point, should the Supreme Court get in the way, then we're going to have to do something about the Supreme Court. And by then, the people will have seen over the course of many years, perhaps from people started paying attention to Dobbs, certainly now the court on the shadow docket is just letting Trump run rampant over the Constitution, blowing past clear constitutional constraints while making up constitutional constraints for good stuff. Right? People are paying attention to this court, and I'll be in the Congress making sure people pay attention to it. So that if this court doesn't stand down and say, okay, fine, that's constitutional, we respect the people's will, then we have to do something about the Supreme Court. And I would say the starting place is to add seats with nominees that are that are cut from the same cloth as Ketanji Brown Jackson, because in every single one of her opinions that she's put out on the court, she's articulating this vision of a Supreme Court that gets out of the people's way absent clear constitutional restraints. She is sided with the January 6th defendants. She is sided with Smith and Wesson because she respects congressional will, absent clear constitutional restraints. And that's what we need to have, so that we, the people, can again be in charge, so that we're not relying on the president's pen and phone, and we're not relying on the Supreme Court's fiat. And we can do that, and that starts January 3rd, 2027.
Wow. Strong. It's Mike, it's such a pleasure to talk with you about this. Your passion is clear. You've got the skills, you've got the experience. Let me ask you one last question. What's giving you hope right now? I mean, you've seen both sides as a journalist and as a candidate. Which job has made you feel more hopeful about America?
So I've got a couple kids, 2 boys, who actually, having been raised on a steady diet of Mike Lawler's lies on the YouTube ads that I don't like they're watching because they watch too much YouTube when they should be watching the garbage I grew up watching. They asked me a couple of days before the election, Daddy, you should run for Congress. Because they had no idea that it was, it was a possibility. It was just something they were throwing. And I thought about it and then looked at the environment after Trump won and Lawler won. And I saw people moving from this despair and this after election day, people sort of went back into their individual holes. They said, I'll tend to my family, my business, my career, my community, my synagogue, my church, but I'm out, no more. But then as things started moving, people started getting angry. They started getting re-engaged. And that gives me hope. That gives me hope. When the forces of authoritarianism are now moving in on our communities, but our communities are now standing up for the people that are clearly the first but won't be the last to be victimized by this administration.
Right on.
That gives hope. But we need to be able to have some lever of power to fight back institutionally, beyond the states, but in the federal government, so that we can emanate that hope more outward and keep that hope spreading and not let the fascists win. So I'm inherently a hopeful person. I never give in to despair.
Right
But what, I don't know if you guys are fans of the band Muse, but they have a pair of songs, one from 2006 at the height of the Bush-Iraq War era, called Knights of Sidonia, which is this anthem. No one's going to take me alive. We're going to have to fight for our rights. It's awesome. Then come 2022, they came out with an album. The closing track was We Are Fucking Fucked. All right. We need to exit that moment and go back into that Sidonian moment and champion our rights, our liberties, our freedoms, our fighting for what's right, and to get rid of the kings. And that's, I think, where we're primed for it. We just have to have the right people in place who are willing to rally people towards it.
Excellent. It's such a pleasure to have you, and I thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Corey, do you have any last
Mike, you know, the main thing that we hear from listeners as we get mail and answer questions is different forms of the question of how can we find hope? And, you know, running for Congress, doing what people of virtue at a moment in which authoritarianism is attacking us and our basic rights need to do, which is to stand up. You're finding a way to do that and using your credentials and expertise from journalism about the court and about law to do so. I think it's a really invaluable thing that you're doing. And I'm very happy and proud to know you for a long time. And thanks so much for joining us on The Oath in the Office.
I'd be remiss to say that to your audience, please visit MikeSacksForCongress.com. We talk about money in politics. You don't have to give much, but if you could contribute a little to show that we are moving forward and we can represent you and deliver us from this darkness we're now in, please join the fight. I would absolutely love to have you as part of our campaign.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, John, Corey, thank you guys.
What a great pleasure, sir. Thank you. Be well. Take care.
Thanks, Mike. Great.